Chapter 21. How my son with Down syndrome helped me up. Who has made man's mouth? Who has made him deaf or mute, seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Holy Bible, 1999, Exodus 4:11. Have you noticed anything different about Josiah? The somber hospital pediatrician asked Christopher and me about 15 hours after I'd given birth to our third son. I exaggerated my naivety. Aside from needing a little oxygen, no, I merrily replied. When I gave birth to my fifth child, as I looked upon his beautiful face, I knew he was different. It wasn't that he was the first baby I had ever had with blonde hair. It was more, but I didn't say anything. His tiny grip was so strong. I snuggled and loved him up. Both of my daughters and Christopher's mother were in the birthing room with us when Josiah was born. Nobody uttered a negative word. I didn't say anything because I didn't want it to be true. I didn't care. He could have had 2 heads and I would have still loved him. But I did feel scared. I thought he was so gorgeous. The soft markers feelings of Down syndrome were only my imagination. I noticed everything else about him. I was in awe of his hair, which was like spun gold, each strand holding rays of sunshine. He smelled so good, as though nothing in the world had ever touched him. His blue eyes shone with an innocent hope and the purity of intent of all humanity. I'm afraid there's more to it than that. The pediatrician stepped on my daydream and persisted. I shuffled uncontrollably in my hospital bed, with no baby beside me. He has some features that lead me to believe he may have Down syndrome, and something. Oh God, this is the confirmation of what I feared. Finally, someone said it. I didn't know what Down syndrome meant for my tiny son, for us as parents, or for his future, nor did I know how we were supposed to raise him. I didn't know what to think. My mind went blank as the doctor talked to us about the characteristics she had noticed that indicated Down syndrome. The gorgeous brush-field spots in his almond-shaped eyes that we would soon find out would sparkle like polished glass, causing people to comment on them almost daily. The delectable space between his toes that we all thought looked like a 2-fingered peace symbol. His chubby cheeks. We fell in love with all of him, and all of the characteristics that made him, him. Our lives had just been completely changed, forever. There was no words for the next few minutes. Christopher and I sat sobbing. What just happened? Down syndrome? The pregnancy books I had read didn't apply here, and worry set in. I was not prepared for this. We were not prepared for this. But I knew that the same little monkey that grew in my round, ice-cream-loving tummy was here, and aside from needing oxygen and having a heart murmur, he was safe. I cried, rivers of tears, and my eyes were swollen shut, but the sad tears soon turned into tears of raw gratefulness. To be honest, I was upset with myself for weeping, but I couldn't help it. I was grateful that we had just had a healthy baby. This was a birth, not a funeral. Who sobs over the birth of a child? No one had died, yet I cried. We finally calmed down and caught our breath. I later learned that this was a completely normal reaction, to grieve the loss of the baby you thought you were going to have so that you may enjoy the credible creation you were blessed with. Where are the flowers and the balloons? Where were the cards and the celebration? Where was my son? Because he needed oxygen, he had to stay in the NICU. A bittersweet cloud hung in the air. Christopher and I tried to make sense of it. It was baffling to have my baby born without all of the mandatory chromosomes. I was especially vulnerable the first 48 hours. We both were. But I soon discovered a gracious peace about my son. I experienced a few days of being totally stunned, dismayed, and sad, but they disappeared rather quickly. At least once an hour, Chris went back and forth to the nursery to stare at our son. He would always come back to my room after stopping at the nursery to be with Josiah. My thoughtful husband. From the second he was born, Josiah had a bond with him. Chris loved him instantaneously and profoundly. As we were all still attempting to grasp the concept of our son having Down syndrome, a young cardiologist came into our room to speak with us. He explained how heart problems were common in babies born with Down syndrome, and Josiah had VSD and 2 holes in his heart. He might die? In hindsight, it's funny how God answers prayers. We talked about adopting a special child, and here's Josiah. It was an emotional roller coaster, but I was so thankful that this beautiful boy was here. After a couple of weeks, his karyotype confirmed Down syndrome, an extra copy of the 21 chromosome, one microscopic extra chromosome. He would later become bald due to alopecia. As difficult as we knew it would be for him to have no hair, in addition to Down syndrome, we tried to embrace the differences. We created Bald is Beautiful signs and shirts and invested in Caillou dolls and videos. After visiting a cardiologist about his heart, the VSD and holes in his heart totally healed on their own within the year. No heart surgery was necessary. We're still scared to this day, but I feel that way about all of my children. I'm a mother. I worry. Most of my family and friends celebrated Josiah's birth, but some people told me how sorry they were. I understood that they meant well, but it was kind of hard to hear. Sadly, the most common question I have been asked is, "Didn't you have prenatal testing?" This is a disheartening query, as with quad screens and prenatal testing, more than 96% of Down syndrome children are terminated before birth. Many of these ghastly abortions are during the second and third trimesters of pregnancy without fetal anesthesia. Because I was 36 years old, my OBGYN offered me an amniocentesis and a triscreen, but I refused them both. When these were first suggested, my doctor, who had delivered 3 of my children, asked if the results would change anything, to which my husband and I gave a resounding no. I would never assume that only perfect people are entitled to their existence and those imperfect souls are only entitled to death. I knew this fact long before I became pregnant, and as someone who values all life as precious, I would never have an abortion again. I am so glad we refused testing because, for us, the unknown would have placed added unnecessary stress on me, on Chris, and even on precious Josiah within me. We said no to the prenatal test for Down syndrome, Matern 21. There is no cure for Down syndrome because it's not a disease. I've also seen example after example of when doctors were wrong in diagnosis, sometimes dead wrong. Of course, some pro-life parents choose to take these tests. For these couples, knowing beforehand can allow their family to prepare, read books, contact organizations, etc., before the little one arrives. That can be highly beneficial for some people. Since Down syndrome is not a disease, it is not necessary that you pray for my son's healing. I do not want him any other way. We didn't receive much assistance, if any, from the hospital. Surfing the web scared the dickens out of us, and many medical sites were grossly outdated. The National Down Syndrome Society, or NDSS, was an impressive place to start, abundant with up-to-date information. Individuals with Down syndrome, not Downs syndrome, have wants, needs, feelings, hopes, dreams, desires, and goals, just like any other person. The always happy stereotypes associated with Down syndrome are well-meaning, but mindless. Down syndrome children are not like puppies. They are not always so sweet and lovable, and they are certainly not constantly happy. This is always entertaining for me to hear, but it's not true. It's not all Disney movies, infectious laughter, and wide-toothed smiles under squinting almond-shaped blue eyes. The baby is your family, and you will see him as a blessing. It can be hard to rear a child with special needs. It's not always rosy, and parents need a respite, a break. As parents of all children, if we can't talk about the rough parts of child rearing, we aren't giving others the permission to do the same. There's no difference here. It is important to get involved with other families of children who have Down syndrome. A lack of resources to cope with a new, unfamiliar situation is likely to increase strain on the family situation. Parents of special needs children are able to talk about it, so you can deal with it when you need to. Currently, people with Down syndrome often graduate high school, work, go to college, live on their own, and get married. They are more like their peers than people realize, and they are usually included in public school.